They walked to their cars, parked side by side just like always. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new families to help, new stories to add to their wall. But they were ready for whatever came next, knowing that their own story, though unusual, had found its proper ending, or rather, its true beginning. 1 year had passed since they opened the family kitchen. The restaurant had become more than just a business. It was a symbol of healing and new beginnings. On this particular evening, Rage and Prina were hosting a special event that marked both an ending and a beginning. The restaurant was filled with familiar faces. Dev stood near the entrance, welcoming members of their growing support group. Dr. Gupta sat at her usual corner table, smiling proudly at how far her former patients had come. Their adoptive parents chatted with Mrs. Kumar, sharing stories and old photographs. "Can I have everyone's attention?" Rage called out, tapping a spoon against his glass. The room quieted as he and Priya stood together near their journey wall, which had grown to include dozens of photos and stories from other families they'd helped reunite. 1 year ago, Priya began, her voice steady and clear, we thought our story was about loss. We thought it was about a marriage that couldn't be and a love that had to end. She paused, looking around at the gathered faces. But we were wrong. Our story was always about finding our truth, finding our real connection, and most importantly, finding a way to help others. Raj picked up where she left off. Today, we're celebrating because our support group has helped 25 families reconnect with their biological relatives. We've worked with adoption agencies to improve their tracking systems. And most importantly, we've learned that sometimes life's biggest challenges can lead to the most meaningful purposes. Dev stepped forward, holding a large envelope. And we have more good news, he announced. The state legislature has just passed what they're calling the Family Connections Bill. It requires adoption agencies to maintain better records and creates a database to help separated families find each other. The room erupted in applause. Their personal tragedy had sparked a change that would help countless others avoid similar situations. Later that evening, as the celebration continued, Priya found Raj in the kitchen, preparing their mother's special biryani recipe, one they had discovered they both knew by heart, taught to them by different people but originating from the same source. "Remember when we used to cook this for our date nights?" Priya asked, helping him chop vegetables. The memory no longer brought pain, just a gentle acknowledgement of their journey. "Now we cook it for family nights instead," Raj replied with a warm smile. "Speaking of which, have you told everyone about your news?" Priya's eyes sparkled. She had recently started dating again, slowly and cautiously, and had met someone who understood and respected her unique family situation. Later, she said, "Tonight is about celebrating how far we've all come." Their adoptive parents joined them in the kitchen, falling into the familiar rhythm of family cooking. What had once been awkward and painful had transformed into something beautiful. Two families joined not by marriage as they'd first thought, but by an even deeper connection. Dr. Gupta, who now came as a friend rather than a therapist, watched them from the doorway. "This," she said softly to Dev, "is what healing looks like." As the evening wound down, Raj and Priya found themselves back at their journey wall. They had just added a new photo, one of them with the governor as he signed the Family Connections Bill into law. Next to it hung their birth mother's picture, her smile seeming to shine with pride. "You know what's strange?" Raj mused, straightening one of the frames. "If someone had told us a year ago that losing our marriage would lead to all this good, we never would have believed them." Priya nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. "We lost one kind of love but gained so many others. We have our biological connection, our adoptive families, our friends, and this whole community we've built." Their story had reached beyond their small circle. They regularly received letters from people around the country sharing similar experiences or seeking guidance. Each letter reminded them that their pain had served a greater purpose. As they locked up the restaurant that night, they could see their reflection in the window. A brother and sister standing side by side, stronger for having faced their truth together. The sign above them read, "The Family Kitchen, where every connection matters." "Ready to go home?" Raj asked, using the word that had taken on new meaning over the past year. Home was no longer a shared apartment or a marriage certificate. Home was the truth they had discovered, the family they had found, and the purpose they had built together. Priya looked at her brother, the word now feeling completely natural, and smiled. "Yes," she said. "I'm ready." Priya smiled, recognizing the truth in his words. Their story hadn't ended with the shocking revelation. It had simply taken a different turn, leading them down a path they never expected, but were now grateful to walk together. 6 months after discovering the truth, the family kitchen was taking shape. The once empty building now buzzed with activity as workers installed kitchen equipment and hanging lights. Raj supervised the contractors while Priya arranged meetings with food suppliers. They had found their rhythm as business partners and siblings, though the journey hadn't been easy. One morning, as they taste-tested recipes for their menu, a familiar face appeared at the door. Mrs. Kumar stood there, looking nervous and clutching her handbag just as she had at their wedding. "I had to come," she said, her voice trembling. "I've been carrying this guilt for so long. I should have spoken up at the wedding when I recognized you both from the old days." Priya pulled up a chair for the elderly woman while Raj made tea. As steam rose from their cups, Mrs. Kumar shared her memories of their birth mother, Anjali, and the night of the fire. She described how chaotic everything had been, with multiple families displaced and children crying everywhere. "Your mother was so brave," Mrs. Kumar said, wiping her eyes. "Even with her burns, she kept searching for you both until she collapsed. By the time she recovered, the adoption papers were signed, and the system had separated you." Instead of anger, Raj and Priya felt a strange sense of peace hearing these details. Understanding their past helped them accept their present. Later that afternoon, Dev dropped by with exciting news about the support group he had started. "We've already helped 3 families reconnect with their biological siblings," he beamed. "Your story inspired people to come forward and search." The restaurant's opening night approached quickly. They had decided to make it a fundraiser for adoption reform, partnering with organizations that helped families track down biological relatives. Local news stations picked up their story again, but this time focusing on their resilience and how they were helping others. "We should invite Dr. Gupta," Priya suggested while they finalized the guest list. Their therapist had become more than just a counselor. She had been their guide through the darkest moments of their journey. The night before the opening, they stayed late at the restaurant, making sure everything was perfect. Priya was arranging family photos on what they called the Journey Wall, a display that told their story and included pictures of their birth mother, adoptive parents, and their life now as siblings. "Remember how scared we were to tell people?" Raj asked, helping her hang the last frame. "Now look at us, we're literally putting our story on the wall." "It's different now," Priya replied, stepping back to admire their work. "We're not victims of a tragedy anymore. We're survivors who are trying to help others." Opening day arrived with a mix of nerves and excitement. Their adoptive parents came early, bringing home-cooked dishes from their own family recipes to add to the celebration. Dev arrived wearing a t-shirt he had designed for their support group, featuring the words "Family Connections Matter." The local newspaper sent a reporter to cover the event. As she interviewed them, Priya realized how much easier it had become to tell their story. "Yes, we lost what we thought was a perfect marriage," she explained, "but we gained something just as precious: the truth about who we are and a chance to help others." The restaurant filled with people, friends, family, supporters, and curious locals. Dr. Gupta arrived with a small gift, a framed quote that read, "Every ending is a new beginning." They hung it right there, adding it to their journey wall. As they worked side by side in the kitchen that evening, their movements were smooth and coordinated. They had always worked well together, and that hadn't changed. What had changed was their understanding of why they worked so well together. The connection they shared went deeper than romance. It was in their blood. A surprise visitor showed up just before closing, the social worker who had helped them uncover their adoption records. She brought with her a box of old documents and photographs she had managed to track down, including a picture of their parents on their wedding day. "Your mother would be proud," she said, watching them work together in their new venture. "You've taken something painful and turned it into something beautiful." As the evening wound down, Raj and Priya stood in their kitchen, surveying their new beginning. The restaurant hummed with happy voices, delicious aromas filled the air, and their journey wall told a story not just of loss, but of discovery, resilience, and hope. "You know what?" Raj said, bumping his shoulder against his sister's playfully. I think we're going to be okay. As they stood in the dusty sunlight streaming through the windows of what could be their future restaurant, they realized that sometimes the end of one dream could lead to the beginning of another. Their story wasn't just about loss anymore, it was about finding a way forward, about transforming pain into purpose. 2 months after moving out, Raj sat in his new apartment, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes. The walls were bare, unlike his old home, which had been filled with wedding photos and memories. A text message lit up his phone. It was Priya, asking if they could meet at the local park. These meetings had become their new normal, a way to maintain their connection while respecting their changed circumstances. The park was busy with families enjoying the weekend sunshine. Raj found Priya sitting on their usual bench, 2 coffee cups in hand. She looked different now. Her hair was shorter, and she'd started wearing glasses instead of contact lenses. Small changes that seemed to mark a transformation into someone new. I found more documents, she said, handing him both a coffee and a manila envelope. The social worker who handled our adoptions finally got back to me. Inside the envelope were yellowed papers detailing the chaos after the fire. Reports showed how overwhelmed the system had been that night, with multiple families displaced. In the rush to find homes for all the children, crucial connections had been missed. Look at this, Priya pointed to a note scribbled in the margin. They knew they were twins, but somehow the files got separated. Someone even wrote verify sibling status but never followed through. Raj felt a familiar anger rising. One person's carelessness changed our entire lives. He crumpled his empty coffee cup, then immediately smoothed it out, a habit from their shared life when Priya would remind him not to make a mess. Their phones buzzed simultaneously. It was Dev in their group chat, checking if they were still coming to his housewarming party that evening. They had been avoiding social gatherings, but Dev's constant support made it hard to say no to him. Should we go? Priya asked hesitantly. People will talk. People already talk, Raj replied with a sad smile. At least Dev's friends know the truth and still care about us. The party was an exercise in navigating their new reality. Some guests who knew their story watched them awkwardly, while others tried too hard to act normal. An elderly aunt kept referring to them as the poor dears until Dev smoothly steered her toward the food table. Later that evening, as they helped Dev clean up, he shared some news. I've been meaning to tell you both. I'm starting a support group for adopted adults searching for their biological families. Your story, it made me realize how many people might need help preventing something like this. Priya and Raj exchanged looks. Their story had already inspired changes in local adoption policies, with agencies implementing better systems for tracking biological siblings. But Dev's idea could help on a more personal level. The next week found them in Dr. Gupta's office again, but this time the atmosphere was different. They sat more comfortably, the initial shock of their situation having mellowed into a dull ache. I've noticed something in our recent sessions, Dr. Gupta said, smiling gently. You've both stopped saying my ex and started saying my sister or my brother. That's significant progress. It was true. The words that had once felt foreign on their tongues had gradually become more natural. They were learning to embrace their true connection while honoring the love they had shared. Driving home from therapy, Raj passed their old apartment building. The for rent sign in the window reminded him of how much had changed. He remembered carrying Priya across that threshold after their wedding, both of them laughing and full of dreams. Now those dreams had transformed into something entirely different. That night, Priya called him, her voice excited. Remember how we always talked about opening a small restaurant? Well, I've been thinking, maybe we still could. Not as a married couple, but as siblings. We always worked well together in the kitchen. The suggestion caught Raj off guard, but as he thought about it, a warm feeling spread through his chest. Their shared love of cooking had been one of the things that brought them together. Maybe it could be part of their new beginning too. The next morning, they met with a real estate agent to look at potential restaurant locations. As they walked through empty spaces, imagining where tables could go and how the kitchen would be laid out, they felt something they hadn't experienced in months. Hope. We'll need to change the name though, Raj said, referring to their original plan of calling it the Newlyweds Kitchen. Priya laughed, a real, genuine laugh that echoed off the empty walls. How about the family kitchen instead? The counselor's office felt too small for the weight of their situation. Dr. Gupta, a kind-faced woman in her 50s, listened intently as Raj and Prina shared their story. The afternoon sun cast warm patches on the carpet, contrasting sharply with the coldness they felt inside. "First, I want you both to know that none of this is your fault," Dr. Gupta said gently after they finished speaking. "What you're going through is unimaginably difficult, but you're doing the right thing by seeking help." The DNA test results had arrived that morning, confirming what they already knew in their hearts. They were indeed twins, separated by a tragic fire and failed by a system that should have kept track of their connection. "I keep thinking about our wedding day," Priya whispered, staring at her hands. "All those people celebrating, if they only knew." Her voice cracked, and for the first time since reading the letter, she began to cry openly. Raj instinctively moved to comfort her but stopped himself, unsure of what was appropriate now. This new awareness created invisible barriers between them, making even the simplest interactions feel complicated. Dr. Gupta handed Priya a tissue. "Your feelings for each other were real and pure. What you need to focus on now is transforming that love into something different, not erasing it completely." Outside the counselor's office, life went on as usual. Their phones buzzed with messages from concerned friends and family, wondering why they'd suddenly gone quiet. Dev had left another voicemail, his worry evident in his voice. "We need to tell them," Raj said that evening as they sat in their kitchen, now filled with an uncomfortable silence. The space between them felt like a vast ocean, though they sat just a few feet apart. Priya nodded slowly. "But how? How do we even begin to explain this?" They decided to start with their parents. The next day, both sets of adoptive parents gathered in their living room, confused by the urgent summons. As Raj and Prina shared their story, the room filled with gasps, tears, and disbelief. "Why didn't the adoption agency tell us?" Raj's mother cried, clutching her husband's hand. "We would have kept you together as siblings." Priya's father, usually a stoic man, wiped tears from his eyes. "All these years, we lived in the same city, and we never knew." The truth spread like ripples in a pond. Friends reacted with shock, support, and sometimes awkward silence. Dev, true to his nature as Raj's best friend, stayed by their side, helping them pack when they decided they couldn't continue living together. "I'll take the apartment," Priya offered quietly. "You can stay with Dev until you find a new place." The thought of dismantling their home felt like another layer of loss, but they knew it was necessary. Their story somehow leaked to the local news, leading to uncomfortable stares and whispers when they went out. Some people were kind, offering support and understanding. Others treated them like a scandal, forgetting that they were real people dealing with real pain. One afternoon, while Raj packed his books, he found their wedding album. They sat together on the floor, looking through it one last time. Each photo told the story of joy they once felt, of a love that had been pure and true, even if it wasn't meant to be. "Look how happy we were," Priya said softly, touching a photo of their first dance. "We had no idea." "Maybe that's what hurts the most," Raj replied, "not just losing what we had, but losing what we thought our future would be." They visited Anjali's grave together, placing flowers beside her headstone. She had passed away shortly after sending the letter, leaving them with questions they would never get answers to. But standing there, they felt a strange sense of peace, knowing that at least now they understood their true connection. Dr. Gupta helped them navigate the legal process of annulling their marriage, while also working through their emotional trauma. She reminded them that healing wasn't linear, some days would be harder than others. "Remember," she told them during a joint session, "you've lost a spouse, but you've gained a sibling. It's okay to mourn what you've lost while being open to what you found." As they left her office that day, walking side by side, but no longer hand in hand, they felt the first tiny spark of hope. The path ahead was unclear and certainly not easy, but at least they didn't have to walk it alone. The sun was setting as they reached their cars, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange. Before driving away in opposite directions, they shared a look that held 1,000 unspoken words. They were no longer husband and wife, but they would always be connected, just in a different way than they had originally thought. Priya's hands shook as she unfolded the letter. Raj stood beside her, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure she could hear it. The afternoon light cast long shadows across their living room as they began to read. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Sharma, I am writing this letter with my last breath, hoping to right a wrong that has haunted me for 28 years. My name is Anjali Devi, and I am your birth mother." The words hit them like a physical blow. Priya grabbed Raj's arm for support while he stood frozen, unable to process what they were reading. But there was more. On the night of April 15th, 1995, our house caught fire. In the chaos and confusion, my 2 children, my precious twins, were separated. One was taken to the north side of the city, the other to the south. By the time I recovered from my injuries, the adoption papers had been signed, and I was told it would be impossible to trace where you had been placed. Raj sank into their couch, pulling Priya down with him. The letter trembled in their hands as they continued reading. "I've spent years searching for you both. When I finally located you, I discovered something that shattered my heart. You had found each other, but in a way I never could have imagined. The wedding announcement in the local newspaper showed your pictures, and I knew immediately. You are my children, my twins, separated by that terrible fire." "This can't be real," Priya whispered, her voice breaking. But as she spoke, memories flooded back, the recurring dreams of fire, the same rare allergies, the identical birthmarks. Everything they'd discovered over the past few months suddenly made horrifying sense. The letter continued, explaining how Anjali had been searching for them for years, how she'd finally traced their adoptions through an old social worker, and how she discovered their marriage announcement too late. She had been diagnosed with terminal cancer shortly after, and this letter was her final attempt to tell them the truth. Dev called twice during the afternoon, but they let it go to voicemail. How could they possibly explain this to anyone? The beautiful wedding photos on their walls now seemed to mock them. The matching coffee mugs in their kitchen with husband and wife written on them made Priya feel sick to her stomach. "The DNA test," Raj said suddenly, breaking the heavy silence. "We should get a DNA test done. Maybe this is all a mistake." His voice carried a desperate hope that they both knew was futile. Deep down, they already knew it was true. There were too many coincidences, too many matching pieces to their puzzle. They spent that night sitting on opposite ends of their couch, the letter lying between them like a physical barrier. Neither could bear to look at their wedding ring, yet neither could bring themselves to remove it either. The love they felt for each other hadn't changed, but everything else had shifted dramatically. "What do we tell people?" Priya finally asked, her voice small in the darkness. "Our parents, our friends. How do we explain this?" Raj ran his hands through his hair, a gesture of helplessness. "Maybe we should talk to a counselor first," he suggested. "Someone who can help us process this before we tell anyone else." The next morning, they called in sick to work. The thought of pretending everything was normal seemed impossible. They found a specialist counselor who agreed to see them immediately, understanding the urgency of their situation. As they drove to the counselor's office, the city seemed different somehow. The streets they'd walked down as a happy couple now felt alien. Every couple they passed made them wonder, did people somehow know? Could they tell that something was terribly wrong? The letter had included one more detail that haunted them. Mrs. Kumar, the elderly relative from their wedding, had known Anjali years ago. She had recognized the similarity between them at the wedding, but had convinced herself it was impossible. Now her strange behavior made perfect sense. In the counselor's waiting room, Priya reached for Raj's hand out of habit, then quickly pulled back. Both of them stared at the space between them on the couch. A space that had never existed before, but now felt like a necessary gulf. The receptionist called their names, and they stood up together, then awkwardly stepped apart. As they walked toward the counselor's office, they knew they were about to begin the most difficult conversation of their lives. Behind that door waited someone who would help them navigate this impossible situation, someone who would guide them through the process of reshaping their entire relationship and identity. The weight of the letter in Priya's purse felt like a stone, but it was nothing compared to the weight in their hearts. As Raj reached for the doorknob, they both took a deep breath, knowing that whatever happened next would change their lives forever. 3 months into their marriage, Raj and Priya had settled into a comfortable routine in their cozy apartment. The morning sunlight streamed through their kitchen window as they shared breakfast, both still feeling like the luckiest people in the world. But life has a way of revealing its secrets in the most unexpected moments. It started with small things. One morning, while organizing their photo albums, Priya noticed something odd. "Hey, look at this," she called out to Rage, pointing to her childhood picture taken at a summer camp. "Doesn't this place look exactly like the camp you went to as a kid?" Raj leaned in closer, his coffee cup paused halfway to his lips. "That's strange," he muttered, examining the familiar red building in the background. "It does look like my old camp. What year was this taken?" 2002, Pryor replied, her finger tracing the date on the back of the photo. "I was there for just one summer before changing foster homes." The coincidence felt odd, but they brushed it off. However, more similarities began surfacing. During a visit to Raj's parents, his mother mentioned his childhood allergy to strawberries. Pryor's eyes widened. She had the exact same allergy, something quite rare according to their doctor. One evening, while Pryor was cooking dinner, she started humming an unusual lullaby. Raj stopped scrolling through his phone and looked up surprised. "How do you know that song?" he asked. "My grandmother used to sing it to me." "I've never heard anyone else know it." Pryor's hands stilled over the stove. "That's impossible," she whispered. "One of my foster mothers used to sing it. She said it was a very old song from her village." The atmosphere in their apartment grew heavy with unspoken questions. That night, neither of them slept well, both lost in thoughts about these strange coincidences. A few days later, while cleaning out their storage closet, Raj found an old shoebox of Pryor's belongings. Inside was a faded photograph he'd never seen before. The background showed a house with distinctive blue shutters and a unique weather vane. His heart nearly stopped. It was identical to the house from his earliest memories, the one that burned down when he was 4. Dev, Raj's best friend, noticed changes in the couple's behavior during their weekly dinner gatherings. "You both seem distracted lately," he commented one evening. "Everything okay?" Pryor tried to smile naturally. "Just busy with work," she replied, but her hand trembled slightly as she reached for her water glass. Rage squeezed her hand under the table, both of them carrying the weight of their growing concerns. Their nights became filled with quiet conversations about their childhoods, comparing timelines and memories. Each revelation brought more questions than answers. They discovered they both had recurring dreams about a fire, both remembered a woman with a distinctive pearl necklace, and both had a small, crescent-shaped birthmark on their right shoulder. Mrs. Kumar's strange behavior at their wedding started making more sense, leaving them with a growing sense of unease. Why had she looked at them that way? What did she know that they didn't? One rainy Sunday afternoon, while sorting through mail, they found an envelope that would change everything. It was addressed to both of them, which was unusual since Pryor had only recently changed her last name. The return address was from a law firm in their old hometown. "Should we open it?" Pryor asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The envelope felt heavy in her hands, as if it carried more than just paper. Rage nodded slowly, his throat tight with anticipation. As Pryor carefully tore open the envelope, neither of them could have prepared for what they were about to discover. The letter inside would unravel everything they thought they knew about their past, their present, and their future together. The rain continued to tap against their windows, nature's quiet drumroll to the revelation that awaited them. In their cozy living room, surrounded by photos of their wedding and their shared life, Raj and Pryor stood on the brink of a truth that would shake their world to its core. The simple piece of paper in Pryor's trembling hands held answers to questions they hadn't even known to ask. The spring breeze carried the sweet scent of cherry blossoms as Raj adjusted his bow tie in front of the mirror. His hands trembled slightly, not from nervousness, but from pure joy. After all, he was about to marry Pryor, the woman who had captured his heart 2 years ago at a local coffee shop. "Hey buddy, you ready?" His best friend Dev poked his head through the door, grinning widely. "Everyone's waiting, and I must say, your bride looks absolutely stunning." Raj took one final look in the mirror and smiled. Everything felt perfect. The garden venue was decorated exactly as they had dreamed, with soft white flowers and twinkling lights strewn between the trees. Their friends and family had flown in from different parts of the country to celebrate their special day. As Raj stood at the altar, his heart skipped a beat when the wedding music began to play. Pryor appeared at the entrance, wearing a beautiful white gown that seemed to float around her as she walked. Her dark eyes sparkled with happiness, and her smile lit up the entire garden. Raj couldn't help but think how lucky he was to have found someone who understood him so completely. During the ceremony, both of them shared their handwritten vows, making their guests laugh and cry. Priya talked about how they'd both loved the same obscure movies and could finish each other's sentences. Rage spoke about their shared love for spicy street food and midnight adventures. But something unusual happened during the reception. An elderly woman, Mrs. Kumar, who was a distant relative of Priya's adoptive family, kept staring at the couple with an odd expression. She would open her mouth as if to say something, then shake her head and look away. When Raj noticed this, he assumed she was just emotional about the wedding. The celebration continued with dancing, heartfelt speeches, and plenty of good food. Dev told embarrassing stories about Raj's college days, while Priya's best friend Meera shared sweet moments from their friendship. Everything was perfect, or at least it seemed that way. As they cut their wedding cake, Priya mentioned something that would later prove significant. "You know," she said softly, "growing up in foster care, I never thought I'd have a big wedding like this. It feels like a dream." Raj squeezed her hand lovingly. "Well, now you have a family that will always be there for you." He had no idea how complicated those words would become. The night ended with sparklers and wishes from their loved ones. As they drove away to start their honeymoon, both Raj and Priya felt like they were living in a fairy tale. They had no way of knowing that their story was about to take an unexpected turn. Back at the venue, Mrs. Kumar sat alone, clutching her handbag tightly. She pulled out an old photograph, yellowed with age, and stared at it with tears in her eyes. The picture showed two small children playing in a garden, children who looked remarkably like younger versions of the bride and groom. She carefully tucked the photo away, wondering if she should have spoken up about what she knew. The newlyweds headed to their honeymoon suite, completely unaware of the mystery that surrounded them. They were just two people in love, excited to start their new life together. Little did they know, their story was far from ordinary, and the truth would change everything they thought they knew about themselves. As the night settled, the last wedding guests departed, carrying with them pieces of a puzzle they didn't even know existed. The gentle evening breeze scattered rose petals across the empty venue, while somewhere in the distance, a clock struck midnight, marking the beginning of an extraordinary journey that neither Raj nor Priya could have anticipated.